West Bengal Council of Higher Secondary Education, Class 11, English B, Semester 1.
An astrologer's day, Arcanorian. The Swami and Mother Worship, Sister Nivedita. Amarnath, Sister Nivedita, composed upon Westminster Bridge, September 3rd, 1802. William Wordsworth. The Bangle Sellers, Sarojini Naidu. The Second Coming, William Butler Yeats. Macbeth, William Shakespeare. Othello, William Shakespeare. As You Like It, William Shakespeare. The Ghost Brahman, Folktales of Bengal, The Man Who Wished to Be Perfect. Folktales of Bengal, A Ghostly Wife, Folktales of Bengal.
An Astrologer's Day, R.K. Narayan. Punctually at midday, he opened his bag and spread out his professional equipment, which consisted of a dozen cowrie shells, a square piece of cloth with obscure mystic charts on it, a notebook, and a bundle of Palmyra writing. His forehead was resplendent with sacred ash and vermilion, and his eyes sparkled with a sharp, abnormal gleam which was really an outcome of a continual searching look for estimates, but which his simple clients took to be a prophetic light and felt comfort. Power of his eyes was considerably enhanced by their position placed, as they were between the painted forehead and the dark whiskers, which streamed down his cheek. Even a half-wit's eyes would sparkle in such a setting. Crown the effect, he wound a saffron-colored turban around his head. This color scheme never failed. People were attracted to him as bees are attracted to cosmos or dahlia stalk. He sat under the boughs of a spreading tamarind tree, which flanked a path running through the town hall park. It was a remarkable place in many ways. A surging crowd was always moving up and down this narrow road morning till night. A variety of trades and occupations was represented all along its way. Medicine sellers, sellers of stolen hardware and junk, magicians, and, above all, an auctioneer of cheap cloth, created enough din all day to attract the whole town. Next to him in vociferousness came a vendor of fried groundnuts, who gave his ware a fancy name each day, calling it Bombay ice cream one day, and on the next Delhi almond, and on the third Raja's delicacy, and so on and so forth. And people flocked to him. Considerable portion of this crowd dallied before the astrologer too. The astrologer transacted his business by the light of a flare, which crackled and smoked up above the groundnut heap nearby. Half the enchantment of the place was due to the fact that it did not have the benefit of municipal lighting. The place was lit up by shop light. One or two had hissing gas lights, some had naked flares stuck on poles, some were lit up by old cycle lamps, and one or two, like the astrologers, managed without lights of their own. It was a bewildering crisscross of light rays and moving shadows. This suited the astrologer very well, for the simple reason that he had not in the least intended to be an astrologer when he began life. He knew no more of what was going to happen to others than he knew what was going to happen to himself next minute. He was as much a stranger to the stars as were his innocent customers. Yet he said things which pleased and astonished everyone. That was more a matter of study, practice, and shrewd guesswork. All the same, It was as much an honest man's labor as any other, and he deserved the wages he carried home at the end of a day. He had left his village without any previous thought or plan. If he had continued there, he would have carried on the work of his forefathers, namely tilling the land, living, marrying, and ripening in his cornfield and ancestral home. But that was not to be. He had to leave home without telling anyone, and he could not rest till he left it behind a couple of 100 miles. To a villager it is a great deal, as if an ocean flowed between. He had a working analysis of mankind's troubles, marriage, money, and the tangles of human ties. Long practice had sharpened his perception. Within 5 minutes he understood what was wrong. He charged 3 pice per question and never opened his mouth till the other had spoken for at least 10 minutes, which provided him enough stuff for a dozen answers and advices. When he told the person before him, gazing at his palm, "In many ways you are not getting the fullest results for your effort," 9 out of 10 were disposed to agree with him. He questioned, "Is there any woman in your family, maybe even a distant relative, who is not well disposed towards you?" Or he gave an analysis of character. "Most of your troubles are due to your nature. How can you be otherwise with Saturn where he is? You have an impetuous nature and a rough exterior." This endeared him to their hearts immediately. Even the mildest of us loves to think that he has a forbidding exterior. The nuts vendor blew out his flare and rose to go home. This was a signal for the astrologer to bundle up too, since it left him in darkness, except for a little shaft of green light which strayed in from somewhere and touched the ground before him. He picked up his cowrie shells and paraphernalia, was putting them back into his bag, when the green shaft of light blotted out. He looked up and saw a man standing before him. He sensed a possible client and said, "You look so careworn, it will do you good to sit down for a while and chat with me." The other grumbled some vague reply. The astrologer pressed his invitation, whereupon the other thrust his palm under his nose, saying, "You call yourself an astrologer?" The astrologer felt challenged and said, tilting the other's palm towards the green shaft of light, "Yours is a nature." "Oh, stop that," the other said. "Tell me something worthwhile." Our friend felt piqued. "I charge only 3 pice per question, and what you get ought to be good enough for your money." At this the other withdrew his arm, took out an anna, and flung it out to him, saying, "I have some questions to ask. If I prove you are bluffing, you must return that anna to me with interest. You find my answers satisfactory, will you give me 5 rupees? No. Or will you give me 8 annas? All right, provided you give me twice as much if you are wrong," said the stranger. This pact was accepted after a little further argument. The astrologer sent up a prayer to heaven as the other lit a cheroot. The astrologer caught a glimpse of his face at the matchlight. There was a pause as cars hooted on the road. Jukka drivers swore at their horses, and the babble of the crowd agitated the semi-darkness of the park. The other sat down, sucking his cheroot, puffing out, sat there ruthlessly. The astrologer felt very uncomfortable. "Here, take your anna back. I am not used to such challenges. It is late for me today." He made preparations to bundle up. The other held his wrist and said, "You can't get out of it now. You dragged me in while I was passing." The astrologer shivered in his grip. and his voice shook and became faint. "Leave me today. I will speak to you tomorrow." The other thrust his palm in his face and said, "Challenge is challenge. Go on." The astrologer proceeded with his throat drying up. "There is a woman—" "Stop," said the other. "I don't want all that. Shall I succeed in my present search or not? Answer this and go. Otherwise I will not let you go till you disgorge all your coins." The astrologer muttered a few incantations and replied, "All right, I will speak. But will you give me a rupee if what I say is convincing? Otherwise I will not open my mouth, and you may do what you like." After a good deal of haggling, the other agreed. The astrologer said, "You were left for dead. Am I right? Ah, tell me more." "A knife has passed through you once?" said the astrologer. "Good fellow." He bared his chest to show the scar. "What else?" "And then you were pushed into a well nearby in the field. You were left for dead." "I should have been dead if some passerby had not chanced to peep into the well," exclaimed the other, overwhelmed by enthusiasm. "When shall I get at him?" he asked, clenching his fist. "In the next world," answered the astrologer. "He died 4 months ago in a far-off town. We will never see any more of him." The other groaned on hearing it. The astrologer proceeded, "Guru Naya." "You know my name," the other said, taken aback. "As I know all other things. Guru Nayak, listen carefully to what I have to say. Your village is 2 days' journey due north of this town. Take the next train and be gone. I see once again great danger to your life if you go from home." He took out a pinch of sacred ash and held it out to him. "Rub it on your forehead and go home. Never travel southward again, and you will live to be 100. "Why should I leave home again?" the other said reflectively. "I was only going away now and then to look for him and to choke out his life if I met him." He shook his head regretfully. "He has escaped my hands. I hope at least he died as he deserved." "Yes," said the astrologer. "He was crushed under a lorry." The other looked gratified to hear it. Place was deserted by the time the astrologer picked up his articles and put them into his bag. Green shaft was also gone, leaving the place in darkness and silence. The stranger had gone off into the night after giving the astrologer a handful of coins. It was nearly midnight when the astrologer reached home. His wife was waiting for him at the door and demanded an explanation. He flung the coins at her and said, "Count them. One man gave all that." 12.5 annas, she said, counting. She was overjoyed. "I can buy some jaggery and coconut tomorrow. Child has been asking for sweets for so many days now. I will prepare some nice stuff for." "The swine has cheated me. Promised me a rupee," said the astrologer. He looked up at him. "You look worried. What is wrong?" "Nothing." After dinner, sitting on the pile, he told her, "You know a great load is gone from me today. I thought I had the blood of a man on my hands all these years. That was the reason why I ran away from home, settled here, and married you. He is alive." She gasped. "You tried to kill?" "Yes, in our village when I was a silly youngster. We drank, gambled, and quarreled badly one day. Why, think of it now." "Time to sleep," he said, yawning, and stretched himself on the pile.
The Swami and Mother worshipped Sister Nivedita. The story of the glimpses which I caught of this part of the Swami's life would be singularly incomplete if it contained no mention of his worship of the Mother. Spiritually speaking, I have always felt that there were two elements in his consciousness. Undoubtedly, he was born a Brahmajnani, as Ramakrishna Paramahamsa so frequently insisted. When he was only 8 years old, sitting at his play, he had developed the power of entering samadhi. The religious ideas towards which he naturally gravitated were highly abstract, philosophical, the very reverse of those which are commonly referred to as idolatrous. In his youth, presumably when he had already been some time under the influence of Sri Ramakrishna, he became a formal member of the Sadharan Brahmo Samaj. In England and America he was never known to preach anything that depended on a special form. The realization of Brahman was his only imperative, the Advaita philosophy his only system of doctrine, the Vedas and Upanishads his sole scriptural authority. And yet, side by side with this, it is also true that in India the word mother was forever on his lips. He spoke of her as we of one deeply familiar in the household life, was constantly preoccupied with. Like other children, he was not always good. Sometimes he would be naughty and rebellious, but always to her. Never did he attribute to any other the good or evil that befell. On a certain solemn occasion he entrusted to a disciple a prayer to her that in his own life acted as a veritable charm. And mind, he added suddenly, turning with what was almost fierceness upon the receiver, make her listen to you when you say it. None of that cringing to mother, remember. Every now and then he would break out with some new fragment of description. The right hand raised in blessing, the left holding the sword, or curse is blessing, would be the sudden exclamation that ended a long reverie, or becoming half lyric in the intensity of his feeling, deep in the heart of hearts of her own, flashes the blood-red knife of Kali. Worshippers of the Mother are they from their birth, in her incarnation of the sword. From him was gathered, in such moments as these, almost every line and syllable of a certain short song called The Voice of the Mother, which I wrote and published about this time. I worship the terrible, he was continually saying. Once, it is a mistake to hold that with all men pleasure is the motive. Quite as many are born to seek after pain. Let us worship the terror for its own sake. He had a whole-hearted contempt for what he regarded as squeamishness or mawkishness. He wasted few words on me when I came to him with my difficulties about animal sacrifice in the temple. He made no reference, as he might have done, to the fact that most of us, loudly as we may attack this, have no hesitation in offering animal sacrifice to ourselves. He offered no argument, as he easily might have done, regarding the degradation of the butcher and the slaughterhouse under the modern system. Why not a little blood to complete the picture? Was his only direct reply to my objection. And it was with considerable difficulty that I elicited from him, from another disciple of Sri Ramakrishna sitting near, the actual facts of the more austere side of Kali worship, that side which has transcended the sacrifice of others. He told me, however, that he had never tolerated the blood offering commonly made to the demons who attend on Kali. This was simple devil worship, and he had no place for it. his own effort being constantly to banish fear and weakness from his own consciousness, and to learn to recognize the mother as instinctively in evil, error, sorrow, and annihilation, as in that which makes for sweetness and joy, followed that the one thing he could not away with was any sort of watering down of the great conception. "Fools," he exclaimed once, as he dwelt in quiet talk on the worship of the terrible, on becoming one with the terrible. "Fools, they put a garland of flowers round thy neck, and then start back in terror, and call thee the merciful." And as he spoke, the underlying egoism of worship that is devoted to the kind God, Providence, the consoling divinity, without a heart for God in the earthquake or God in the volcano, overwhelmed the listener. One saw that such worship was at bottom, as the Hindu calls it, merely shopkeep. And one realized the infinitely greater boldness and truth of the teaching that God manifests through evil, as well as good. One saw that the true attitude for the mind and will, that are not to be baffled by the personal self, was in fact the determination, in the stern words of the Swami Vivekananda, to seek death not life, to hurl oneself upon the sword's point, become one with the terrible for evermore. It would have been altogether inconsistent with the Swami's idea of freedom to have sought to impose his own conceptions on a disciple. But everything in my past life as an educationist contributed to impress on me now the necessity of taking on Indian consciousness, and the personal perplexity associated with the memory of the pilgrimage to Amarnath was a witness not to be forgotten to the strong place which Indian systems of worship held in that consciousness. I set myself therefore to enter into Kali worship, as one would set oneself to learn a new language, or take birth deliberately, perhaps, in a new race. To this fact I owe it that I was able to understand as much as I did of our Master's life and thought. Step by step, glimpse after glimpse, I began to comprehend a little. And in matters religious he was, without knowing it, a born educator. He never checked a struggling thought. Being with him one day when an image of Kali was brought in, and noticing some passing expression, I suddenly said, "Perhaps, Swamiji, Kali is the vision of Siva. Is she?" He looked at me for a moment. Well, express it in your own way," said gently. "Express it in your own way." Another day he was going with me to visit the old Maharshi Devendranath Tagore, in the seclusion of his home in Jorasank, and before we started, questioned me about a death scene which I had been present the night before. I told him eagerly of the sudden realization that had come to me, that religions were only languages. We must speak to a man in his own language. His whole face lighted up at the thought. "Yes," exclaimed, and Ramakrishna Paramahamsa was the only man who taught that. He was the only man who ever had the courage to say that we must speak to all men in their own language. Yet there came a day when he found it necessary to lay down with unmistakable clearness his own position in the matter of mother worship. I was about to lecture at the Kalighat, and he came to instruct me that if any foreign friends should wish to be present, they were to remove their shoes and sit on the floor, the rest of the audience. In that presence no exceptions were to be made. I was myself to be responsible. After saying all this, however, He lingered before going, and then, making a shy reference to Colonel Hay's poem of the guardian angels, he said, "That is precisely my position about Brahman and the gods. I believe in Brahman and the gods, and not in anything else." He was evidently afraid that my intellectual difficulty would lie where his own must have done, in the incompatibility of the exaltation of one definite scheme of worship with the highest Vedantic theory of Brahman. He did not understand that to us who stood about him, he was himself the reconciliation of these opposites, and the witness to the truth of Uch. Following up this train of thought, therefore, he dropped into a mood of half-soliloquy, and sat for a while talking disjointedly, answering questions, trying to make himself clear, yet always half-absorbed in something within, as if held by some spell he could not break. "How I used to hate Kali," he said, "and all her ways. That was the ground of my 6 years' fight, that I would not accept her. But I had to accept her at last. Ramakrishna Paramahamsa dedicated me to her, and now I believe that she guides me in every little thing I do, and does with me what she will. Yet I fought so long. I loved him, you see, and that was what held me. I saw his marvelous purity, I felt his wonderful love. His greatness had not dawned on me then. All that came afterwards when I had given in. That time I thought him a brain-sick baby, always seeing visions and the rest. I hated it. And then I too had to accept her. No, the thing that made me do it is a secret that will die with me. I had great misfortunes at that time. It was an opportunity. She made a slave of me." Those were the very words, "a slave of you." And Ramakrishna Paramahamsa made me over to her. Strange. He lived only 2 years after doing that. Most of the time he was suffering. Not more than 6 months did he keep his own health and brightness. Guru Nanak was like that, looking for the one disciple to whom he would give his power. And he passed over all his own family. His children were as nothing to him, till he came upon the boy to whom he gave it, and then he could die. The future, you say, will call Ramakrishna Paramahamsa an incarnation of Kali? Yes, I think there's no doubt that she worked up the body of Ramakrishna for her own ends. You see, I cannot but believe that there is somewhere a great power that thinks of herself as feminine, called Kali and Mother. And I believe in Brahman too. But is it not always like that? Is it not the multitude of cells in the body that make up the personality, the many brain centers, not the one that produce consciousness? Unity in complexity. Just so low. And why should it be different with Brahman? It is Brahman. It is the one. And yet, it is the gods too. Similarly, he had returned from a pilgrimage in Kashmir, saying, "These gods are not merely symbols. They are the forms that the bhaktas have seen." And it is told of Sri Ramakrishna that he would sometimes speak, coming out of samadhi, the past experience of that soul that dwelt within him. He who came as Rama, as Krishna, as Jesus dwells here. And then would add playfully, tooming to his chief disciple, "But not in your Vedanta sense, Norin." Thus we are admitted to a glimpse of the struggle that goes on in great souls, the correlation and mutual adjustment, different realizations, different fime. On the one side the mother, on the other side, Brahman. We are reminded of the Swami's own words, heard long ago, "The impersonal God, seen through the mists of sense, is personal." In truth, it might well be that the two ideas could not be reconciled. Both conceptions could not be equally true at the same time. It is clear enough that in the end, as a subjective realization, either the mother must become Brahman, or Brahman the mother. One of the two must melt into the other. Question of which, in any particular case, ending on the destiny and the past of the worshipping soul. For my own part, the conversation I have related marked an epoch. Ever since it took place, I have thought I saw in my master's attitude a certain element of one who carried for another a trust confided to him. He would always, when asked to explain the image of Kali, speak of it as the book of experience, in which the soul turns page after page, only to find that there is nothing in it, after all. And this, to my own mind, is the final explanation. Kali, the mother, is to be the worship of the Indian future. In her name will her sons find it possible to sound many experiences to their depth. And yet, in the end, their hearts will return to the ancient wisdom, and each man will know, when his hour comes, all his life was but as a dream. Who does not remember the Veda-like words of the Gita? Not verily by avoiding action can a man rise to this inaction. May we not, similarly, know for a certainty that, not without going through this experience can we reach the realization at the end. Through the mother to Brahman, through new life and knowledge, and many changes, through the struggles, the victories, and the defeats of the immediate future, to that safe heaven of the soul where all is one, and all is peace. As I look more and more closely into the life of that great teacher whom I have followed, I see each day with growing clearness how he himself was turning the pages of the book of experience. That it was only when he had come to the last word, he could lie back like a weary child, in the arms of his mother, to be wrapped away at last into the supreme revelation, knowing that all this was but a dream.
Amarnath, Sister Nivedita. It was in the course of an open-air meal in the Mughal gardens at Achabal. The Swami suddenly announced that he would go to Amarnath with pilgrims and take his daughter with him. Within our little party, there was too much feeling of delighted congratulation for any obstacle to be put in the way of the fortunate member. And aided thus, as well as by the state officer in charge of the journey, preparations went forward for this unique experience. Kashmir seemed in those weeks to be full of pilgrims. We left Achabal and returned to our boats at Islamabad, final arrangements, and everywhere we saw the march of gathering hosts. It was all very quiet and orderly and picturesque. 2,000 or 3,000 people would encamp in a field and leave it before dawn, with no trace of their occupation, save the ashes of their cook. They carried a bazaar with them, and at each halting place, pitching of tents and opening of shops took place with incredible rapidity. Organization appeared to be instinctive. Broad Street would run through the middle of one part of the camp, and here one could buy dried fruits, milk, dals, and rice. Tent of the Tehsildar, with that of the Swami on one side and my own on the other, was generally placed near some advantageous spot for the lighting of the evening fire, and thus his neighborhood tended to form a social center. There were hundreds of monks, all the orders, with their Jerua tents, some no larger than a good-sized umbrella, and amongst these, Swami's influence appeared to be magnetic. The more learned of them swarmed about him at every halting place, filling his tent, remaining absorbed in conversation throughout the hours of daylight. The talk on their side, he told us afterwards, had been all of Siva, and they had remonstrated with him seriously, when he had insisted occasionally on drawing their attention to the world about them. Even foreigners, they urged, were men. Why make such distinctions between Swadesh and Bidesh? Nor could many of them understand the warmth of his love and sympathy for Mohammedanism. The same otherworldliness that made Swadesh and Bidesh indistinguishable also prevented these simple souls from formally conceiving of a unity, in which Hindu and Mohammedan were but rival elements. The soil of the Punjab, they argued, was drenched with the blood of those who had died for the faith. Here, at least, let him practice a narrow orthodoxy. In answer to this, as became one who was, in fact, an anachronism of the future, the Swami made those practical concessions of the moment that were expressive of his love for the brethren, and drove his principles home to their minds, the greater force and vehemence. But, as he told the tale of his warm discussions, the foreign mind could not help, with some amusement, noting the paradox. The Tehsildar himself, and many officers and servants of the pilgrimage, had been Mussulmans, and that no one had dreamt of objecting to their entering the cave with the Hindu worshippers on the ultimate arrival at the shrine. The Tehsildar came afterwards, indeed, with a group of friends, begging formal acceptance by the Swami as disciples. And in this, no one seemed to find anything incongruous or surprising. Leaving Islamabad, caught up somewhere with the pilgrimage, and camped with it, for that night, at Pawan, place famous for its holy springs. I can remember yet the brilliance of the lights reflected in the clear black waters of the tank that evening, and throngs of pilgrims proceeding in little groups from shrine to shrine. At Palgam, the village of the shepherds, camp halted for a day, Deep Kadasi. It was a beautiful little ravine floored, for the most part with sandy islands in the pebble-worn bed of a mountain stream. The slopes about it were dark with pine trees, and over the mountain at its head was seen, at sunset, the moon, not yet full. It was the scenery of Switzerland or Norway at their gentlest and loveliest. Here we saw the last of human dwellings, a bridge, a farmhouse, with its plowed fields, and a few cedar huts. And here, on a grassy knoll, when the final march began, we left the rest of our party in camp. Through scenes of indescribable beauty, 3,000 of us ascended the valleys that opened before us as we went. First day we camped in a pine wood. The next, we had passed the snow line and pitched our tents beside a frozen river. That night, the great campfire was made of juniper, and the next evening, at still greater heights, the servants had to wander many miles in search of this scanty fuel. At last the regular pathway came to an end, and we had to scramble up and down, along goat paths, on the face of steep declivities, till we reached the boulder-strewn gorge, in which the cave of Amarnath was situated. As we ascended this, we had before us the snow peaks covered with a white veil, newly fallen, and in the cave itself, in a niche never reached by sunlight, shone the great ice lingam that must have seemed to the awestruck peasants who first came upon it like the waiting presence of God. The Swami had observed every rite of pilgrimage as he came along. He had told his beads, kept fasts, and bathed in the ice-cold waters of 5 streams in succession, crossing the river gravels on our second day. And now, as he entered the cave, it seemed to him as if he saw Siva made visible before him. Amidst the buzzing, swarming noise of the pilgrim crowd and the overhead fluttering of the pigeons, he knelt and prostrated 2 or 3 times unnoticed, and then, afraid lest emotion might overcome him, he rose and silently withdrew. He said afterwards that in these brief moments he had received from Siva the gift of Amar, not to die until he himself had willed it. In this way, possibly, was defeated or fulfilled that presentiment which had haunted him from childhood, that he would meet with death in a Siva temple amongst the mountains. Outside the cave, there was no Brahminic exploitation of the helpless people. Amarnath is remarkable for its simplicity and closeness to nature. But the pilgrimage culminates on the great day of Rakhi Bandhan, and our wrists were tied with the red and yellow threads of that sacrament. Afterwards, we rested and had a meal on some high boulders beside the stream, before returning to our tent. The Swami was full of the place, felt that he had never been to anything so beautiful. He sat long silent. Then he said dreamily, "I can well imagine how this cave was first discovered. A party of shepherds one summer day must have lost their flocks and wandered in here in search of them. Then, when they came home to the valleys, they told how they had suddenly come upon Mahadev, of my master himself. In any case, a like story was true. The purity and whiteness of the ice pillar had startled and enwrapped him. Cavern had revealed itself to him as the secret of Kailas, and for the rest of his life, he cherished the memory of how he had entered a mountain cave, come face to face there with the Lord himself.
Composed upon Westminster Bridge, September 3rd, 1802. William Wordsworth.
Composed upon Westminster Bridge, September 3rd, 1802. William Wordsworth. Earth has not anything to show more fair. Dull would he be of soul who could pass by a sight so touching in its majesty. This city now doth like a garment wear the beauty of the morning, silent, bare. Ships, towers, domes, theaters, and temples lie open unto the fields and to the sky, all bright and glittering in the smokeless air. Never did sun more beautifully steep in his first splendor. Valley, rock, hill, near Sa'el never felt a calm so deep. The river glideth at his own sweet will. Dear God, the very houses seem asleep, and all that mighty heart is lying still.
Earth is not anything to show more fair. Dull would he be of soul who could pass by a sight so touching in its majesty. This city now doth like a garment wear there the beauty of the morning silent bare. Ships, towers, domes, theaters, and temples lie open unto the fields and to the sky, all bright and glittering in the smokeless air. Never did sun more beautifully steep in his first splendor, valley, rock, or hill. Ne'er saw, never felt a calm so deep. The river glideth at his own sweet will. Dear God, the very houses seem asleep, and all that mighty heart is lying still. Dear God, the very houses seem asleep, and all that mighty heart is lying still.
The bangle sellers, Sarojini Naidu. Bangle sellers are we who bear our shining loads to the temple fair. Who will buy these delicate, bright, rainbow-tinted circles of light, lustrous tokens of radiant lives for happy daughters and happy wives? Some are meet for a maiden's wrist, silver and blue as the mountain mist. Some are flushed like the buds that dream on the tranquil brow of a woodland stream. Some are aglow with the bloom that cleaves to the limpid glory of newborn leaves. Some are like fields of sunlit corn, meet for a bride on her bridal morn. Some, like the flame of her marriage fire, or rich with the hue of her heart's desire, tinkling, luminous, tender and clear, like her bridal laughter and bridal tear. Some are purple and gold flecked, gray, for she who has journeyed through life midway, whose hands have cherished, whose love has blessed, and cradled fair sons on her faithful breast, and serves her household and fruitful bride, and worships the gods at her husband's side.
Bangle sellers are we who bear our shining loads to the temple fair. Who will buy these delicate, bright, rainbow-tinted circles of light, lustrous tokens of radiant lives for happy daughters and happy wives? Some are meet for a maiden's wrist, silver and blue as the mountain mist. Some are flushed like the buds that dream on the tranquil brow of a woodland stream. Some are aglow with the bloom that cleaves to the limpid glory of newborn leaves. Some are like fields of sunlit corn, meet for a bride on her bridal morn. Some like the flame of her marriage fire, or rich with the hue of her heart's desire, tinkling, luminous, tender and clear, like her bridal laughter and bridal tear. Some are purple and gold-flecked gray, for she who has journeyed through life midway, whose hands have cherished, whose love has blessed, and cradled fair sons on her faithful breast, and serves her household in fruitful pride, and worships the gods at her husband's side. Some are purple and gold-flecked gray, for she who has journeyed through life midway, whose hands have cherished, whose love has blessed, and cradled fair sons on her faithful breast, and serves her household in fruitful pride, and worships the gods at her husband's side.
The Second Coming. William Butler Yeats. Turning and turning in the widening gyre. Falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed and everywhere. The ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand. The second coming. Hardly are those words out, when a vast image out of Spiritus Mundi troubles my sight. Somewhere in sands of the desert, a shape with lion body and the head of a man, a gaze blank and pitiless as the sun, is moving its slow thighs, while all about it, real shadows of the indignant desert bird. The darkness drops again, but now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. And what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born.
Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand. The second coming. Hardly are those words out when a vast image out of Spiritus Mundi troubles my sight. Somewhere in sands of the desert, a shape with lion body and the head of a man, a gaze blank and pitiless as the sun is moving its slow thighs, while all about it, real shadows of the indignant desert birds. The darkness drops again, but now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. And what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born.
Thank you. Which wasn't other words were taught by one hour's words are, where a vast image out of Spiritus Mundi troubles my sight. Somewhere in sands of the desert, a shape with lion body and the head of a man, a gaze blank and pitiless as the sun, is moving its slow thighs, while all about it, real shadows of the indignant desert birds. The darkness drops again, but now I know the 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. And what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born.
Macbeth, William Shakespeare. Macbeth. When Duncan was the King of Scotland, there lived a brave general, who was looked up to with high esteem throughout Scotland for his great valor and skill in wars. He was also a close relative of the old king. He was Macbeth, Thane of Glamis. Of late, he defeated a rebel army assisted by the troops of Norway in great numbers. he emerged as Valor's minion and Bellona's bridegroom. His valor and courage demanded praise from all and sundry. The two Scottish generals, Macbeth and Banquo, were returning from the great battle. There was thunder and lightning. On the way they were stopped by the strange appearance of three figures that looked like women, except that they had beards, and their withered skin and wild dresses made them look like unearthly creatures. They were dancing, they were singing, "Fair is foul, and foul is fair," hover through the fog and filthy air. As they saw the two generals, first witch saluted Macbeth with the title of Thane of Glamis. The general was scarcely startled to find himself known by such creatures. The second witch addressed him as the Thane of Cawdor, to which he had no pretension, and the third told him, "You will be the King of Scotland hereafter." Such a prophetic greeting might well amaze him, for he knew that as long as the king's son survived, he could scarcely hope to succeed to the throne. By this time, Banquo was curious to know the reason why the witches had little to say about him, whereas they kindled hope in the heart of his dearest friend. So the witches tuned towards Banquo and told him in somewhat riddling terms, "Be lesser than Macbeth and greater, not so happy, but much happy." They also prophesied that although Banquo would never reign as the King of Scotland, yet his successors would be the king. And then they turned into thin air and vanished, by which the generals realized the weird sisters to be witches. While they stood there pondering on the strangeness of this adventure, there arrived certain envoys from the king, who were empowered to confer upon Macbeth the title of Thane of Cawdor. Was an event so miraculously corresponding with the prediction of the witches that Macbeth stood there wrapped in amazement, unable to respond to the greetings of the envoys, Ross and Angus. Hopes began to swell in his heart with this Thane of Cawdorship. He was now thinking of the prediction, the third witch. Turning to Banquo, he said, "Do you not hope that your children shall be the kings of the future, since what the witches promised to me has so wonderfully come to pass?" "That hope," replied Banquo, "might enkindle you to aim at the throne. But oftentimes these ministers of darkness tell us truths in little things to betray us into deeds of greatest consequence." However, the prophecies of the witches had sunk too deep into the mind of Macbeth. He told his wife about the strange prediction of the three witches, and also its partial accomplishment. Lady Macbeth spurred on the reluctant purpose of Macbeth, who felt compunction at the thoughts of blood. She did not cease to represent the murder of the king as a step absolutely necessary to the fulfillment of the flattering prophecy. It happened that at this time King Duncan came to visit Macbeth's castle, along with his two sons, Malcolm and Donalbain, and numerous thanes and attendants to honor Macbeth for his triumph against the rebel. Inverness, castle of Macbeth, was pleasantly situated on a hill, and the air about it was sweet and wholesome. The nests that the swallows or the marlets had built under all the jutting friezes and buttresses of the building. The king was extremely pleased as he entered the palace, not only for its wonderful ambience, but also due to the attention and respect of his hostess, Lady Macbeth, who had developed the art of camouflaging her treacherous purposes with smiles and charming etiquette. Tired of his long journey, King went early to bed. It was the middle of the night. Now over half the world nature seems dead, and wicked dreams abuse sleeping men's minds, and none but the wolf or the murderer is out for hunt. This was the time when Lady Macbeth woke up to plot the murder of the king. She would not have undertaken a deed so abhorrent to her sex, and she was well aware of her husband's nature. That was too full of the milk of human kindness to execute a contrived murder. She knew that her husband was ambitious, but he was not prepared for the height of crime which commonly accompanies inordinate ambition. She had won his consent about the murder, but she doubted his resolution, and she feared that the natural tenderness of his disposition would defeat the purpose. So, armed with a dagger, she approached the king's chamber. There she found Duncan in sound sleep, and as she viewed him earnestly, there was something in his face which resembled her own father. Thus she had not the courage to proceed further. She returned to confer with her husband. He thought that there were strong reasons against the murder. Macbeth was not only a subject, but also a close relative to Duncan. Besides, he had been a host to the king, so his duty would be to protect the king from the threat of the murderers, not to bear the dagger himself. He also considered how just and merciful king this Duncan had been, how clear of offense to his subject, how loving to his nobility, that his subjects are doubly bound to avenge his death. Moreover, by the favors of the king, Macbeth stood high in the opinion of all sorts of men. And how would those honors be stained by the reputation of so foul-worded? In these conflicts of the mind, Lady Macbeth found that her husband had resolved to proceed no further. But she was a woman not easily shaken from her purpose. She began to pour in at his ears words tinged with the valor of her tongue, infusing a portion of her own spirit into his mind, assigning reason upon reason why he should not shrink from the resolution he had earlier undertaken, and how the action of one short night would give to all their nights and days to come sovereign power and royalty. She even accused him of cowardice and fickleness, reverting to his decision. She also told him how practicable it would be to lay the guilt of the deed on the drunken grooms who were sleeping outside the king's chamber. So Macbeth took the dagger in his hand and softly stole in the dark to the room where Duncan slept. As he advanced towards the bedchamber, he visualized another dagger hanging in the air, with the handle pointed towards him, and there were drops of blood on the tip and the blade of the dagger. Macbeth tried to grasp the dagger, but it faded into the air. To his realization, it was only a mere phantasm created from his hot and oppressed brain for the business he had in hand. Overcoming this fear, Macbeth entered Duncan's room and slew the hapless king. Just as he was about to leave the room, one of the grooms who was sleeping adjacent to the chamber laughed in his sleep and cried out, "Murder!" for which both of the grooms woke up. But then one of them said, "God bless us," and the other responded, "Amen," and went off to sleep. Macbeth also tried to say amen. The word seemed to be stuck in his throat, and he could not utter it. He felt that he heard a voice which said, "Sleep no more. Macbeth murders sleep. The innocent sleep. It nourishes life. Glamis has murdered sleep, and therefore Cawdor shall sleep no more. Macbeth shall sleep no more." Macbeth thus returned to his wife, who by now started to think that he had failed in his objective. He came in such distracted a state that she reproached for his want of resoluteness, and sent him to wash his hands of the blood that stained them. Meanwhile she took the dagger to stain the cheeks of the grooms with blood, in order to make it seem their guilt. Day broke, and with it the discovery of the murder. Though Macbeth and his wife showed their utmost grief, and the evidence of murder was sufficiently strong against the grooms, yet the entire suspicion fell upon Macbeth. Duncan's 2 sons fled immediately. Malcolm, the eldest, sought for refuge in the English court, while Donalbain, the youngest son, fled to Ireland. The death of the king, the throne being vacated, and the sons being unavailable, Macbeth, who was the next claimer, was crowned the King of Scotland. Thus the prediction of the Weird Sisters was literally accomplished. Macbeth and his queen could not forget the prophecy of the Weird Sisters, that though Macbeth would be the king, the children of Banquo, not of Macbeth, would be the kings after him. The thought that they had defiled their hands with blood by committing regicide, only to place the posterity of Banquo upon the throne, had rankled within them. So Macbeth decided to kill Banquo and his son Fleance, to nullify the prediction of the Weird Sisters. To solemnize the kingship, a banquet was arranged. All the chief thanes along with Banquo and Fleance were invited. Macbeth appointed some hired assassins, and beset them on the way. Banquo and his son were supposed to pass. The assassins pounced upon them and killed Banquo, but Fleance managed to escape. Meanwhile, Macbeth and his wife played the role of perfect hosts with affable, graceful manners that conciliated everyone present in the banquet. Macbeth discoursed freely with the thanes and noblemen, and regretted the absence of his dearest friend Banquo. No sooner did he lament for his friend whom he was missing in the banquet, than Macbeth saw the ghost of Banquo occupying the seat reserved for him. At this horrible sight, his cheeks became white with fear, and he stood quite unmannered and unnerved, with his eyes fixed upon the ghost. His queen and all other nobles saw nothing, but perceived him gazing upon an empty chair. They took it to be a fit of distraction, and Lady Macbeth even reproached him, and told him that it was the same fancy which made him see the dagger in the air when he was about to murder Duncan. But Macbeth continued to visualize the ghost of Banquo, and gave no heed to all the noblemen could say, and addressed the ghost with distracted words. Lady Macbeth, fearing the dreadful secret would be disclosed, in great haste dismissed the guests, excusing the infirmity of Macbeth as a disorder he was often troubled. Macbeth and his wife had their sleeps affected with terrible dreams, and the blood of Banquo troubled them not more than the escape of Fleance, whom they now looked upon as father to a line of kings who would keep their posterity on the throne. With these miserable thoughts they found no peace, and Macbeth decided to visit the heath once more, in search of the 3 weird sisters to know his final outcome. He found them in a cave near the heath where they were engaged in preparing their dreadful charms, by which they conjured up infernal spirits to reveal his futurity. Their horrid ingredients, toads, bats, and serpent, eye of a newt, tongue of a dog, the leg of a lizard, the wing of a night owl, the scale of a dragon, the tooth of a wolf, the mummy of a witch, the root of poisonous hemlock, gall of a goat, the liver of a Jew, and the finger of a dead child. All these were set on to boil in a huge cauldron, which was cooled with baboon's blood. To the potion they poured in the blood of a sow that had eaten her young, and they threw into the flame the grease that had sweaten from a murderer's gibbet. By these charms they invoked the infernal spirits to answer their question. Macbeth demanded to know from them whether he would have his doubts resolved by them or by their master, the spirit. He was not daunted by the ceremonies that he saw and boldly said, "Where are they? Let me see them." So they called the spirits. There were 3 of them. The first one looked like an armed head, and he called Macbeth by name and told him, "Beware of the Thane of Fife." Macbeth thanked him for the caution. He was jealous of Macduff, Thane of Fife. The second spirit arose in the likeness of a bloody child. He called Macbeth by name and told him to have no fear of death, but to laugh and scorn at the power of man born naturally of a woman's womb. He advised him to be bold, bloody, and resolute. "Then live, Macduff, the might. What need do I fear of you, Macduff? But yet I will make assurance doubly sure. You shall not live so that I may tell the pale-hearted fear that it lies, and sleep in spite of thunder." Third spirit arose in the form of a crowned child with a tree in his hand. He also called Macbeth by name and comforted him against conspiracies, told him that he should never be vanquished until the wood of Burnham to Dunsinane Hill would. Who can unfix the forest and move it from its earth-bound roots? I see one shall live the usual period of man's life, not be cut off by a violent death, but my heart throbs to know one thing. Tell me, you can tell me so much, if Banquo's issue shall ever reign this kingdom. Here the cauldron sank into the ground, and a noise of music was heard, and 8 shadows like kings passed by Macbeth, and Banquo was the last figure, all smeared with blood, and Banquo smiled at Macbeth. Banquo bore a glass, which showed the figures of many more, and pointed to the image. Macbeth realized that these were the posterity of Banquo, who would reign after him in Scotland. 3 witches danced with the sound of soft music, and making a show of duty and welcome to Macbeth, vanished in the air. The first news that Macbeth got soon after coming out of the witches' cave was that Macduff, the Thane of Fife, fled to England to join the army which was forming against him under the leadership of Malcolm to displace Macbeth and set Malcolm, the right heir, on the throne of Scotland. Stung with rage, Macbeth set upon the castle of Macduff. Macduff's wife and children, whom the Thane had left behind in Scotland, were brutally slaughtered. These merciless activities had gradually alienated the nobility from Macbeth. Many fled to join Malcolm and Macduff, who were now approaching with a powerful army, which had been raised in England, and the rest secretly wished success to their arms, though for fear of Macbeth they could not take active. Everybody hated Macbeth, the tyrant. Nobody honored him, but all suspected him, and he began to envy the condition of Duncan, who now slept soundly in his grave, against whom treason had done its worst. Neither steel nor poison, domestic malice nor foreign levies could hurt him any longer. Meanwhile the Queen, who had been the sole partner in his wickedness, in whose bosom he could sometimes seek a momentary repose from those terrible dreams which afflicted them both, passed away. Unable to bear the remorse of guilt, she began to suffer from somnambulism. She ultimately died. Macbeth was left alone. He grew careless of life and longed for death. The near approach of Malcolm's army roused in him what remained of his ancient courage, and he determined to die with armor on his back. The hollow promises of the three witches had also filled in him a kind false confidence, and he remembered the prophecies of the spirits that no one born of a woman's womb could kill him. He also believed in the soothsaying that he could never be vanquished until Birnam Wood would come to Dunsinane, which he thought was impossible. So he shut himself up in his own castle, which was thought to be absolutely impregnable, and waited for Malcolm to invade it. Finally, a day came when a messenger approached him, pale and trembling with fear, almost unable to report to Macbeth that which he had seen, and yet he averred that, as he stood on the hill for his watch, he chanced to see the Birnam and perceived the wood to be moving. "Liar," roared Macbeth, "if you speak false, you shall be hanged alive upon the next tree till famine ends your life." By now Macbeth had begun to doubt the equivocal sayings of the free spirit. He never feared of being vanquished till Birnam Wood should advance towards Dunsinane. And now the wood did move. "However," said Macbeth, "if this which he vouches be true, let us take arms and move out. There is no fleeing from hence, nor staying in here. I begin to be weary of the sun, and wish my life is at an end." Saying these, he sallied forth upon the besiegers who had now reached the castle. The strange sight of the moving wood was easily solved. When the besieging army advanced towards the castle through the wood of Birnam, Malcolm, like an astute general, instructed all his soldiers to hew down a bough and bear it before them so that they could conceal the actual number of invaders to Macbeth. This marching of soldiers with boughs in their hands had appeared from a distance, a moving wood, and the messenger was evidently frightened. Thus the words of the spirits brought to pass, in a sense different from that in which Macbeth understood, and so he lost his confidence. Fierce skirmish took place, in which Macbeth slaughtered all those who challenged him, until he faced Macduff. And remembering the caution of the spirit who had counseled Hyn to stay away from the Thane of Fife, he would have turned back, but Macduff, who had been seeking him through the whole fight, opposed his turning, and a fierce contest ensued. Macduff reproached him and called him a tyrant, murderer, hellhound, and a villain, brutally slaughtering his wife and his innocent children by hired murderers. Then Macbeth remembered the words of the spirit, and boldly proclaimed, "I bear a charmed life, which must not yield to a man born naturally of a woman." At this Macduff snubbed him, and declared that he was never, as the ordinary man is naturally born, but was untimely taken out from his mother's womb. Macbeth lost his strength and resolute. He lamented, "In future, man should never believe the lying equivocations of witches and juggling spirits, who deceive us in words that have double meanings. And while they keep their promise literally, they disappoint us by providing different meaning." He then refused to fight against Macduff. Macduff, who abhorred him, scornfully told him, that they would imprison him and demonstrate him to the lady as a tyrant, quite like the way monsters are displayed. "Never," said Macbeth, "I will not live to kiss the ground for young Malcolm's feet." His valiance returned with despair, and he threw upon Macduff, who after a great struggle overpowered him and severed his head and presented it to the young and lawful new king. Malcolm then ascended the throne, mid acclamations of the noblemen and the people of Scotland. Othello, William Shakespeare.
Chapter 2 Othello. Long time ago in Venice there was a rich senator who was known as Brabantio. He had a beautiful daughter, gentle Desdemona. She was sought by various suitors, both of her clime and complexion, but she found none of her choice. The noble lady, who regarded the heart more than the appearance and complexion of man, had chosen the person of her affections, a Moor, a dark-complexioned nobleman, whom her father loved deeply, and often invited him to their mansion. The noble Moor, Othello, was a valiant soldier, and by his heroics in bloody wars against the Turks, he had been raised to the rank of the general, and was highly esteemed and revered throughout the state. Othello had been a great traveler, and Desdemona was all the more keen to listen to the stories of adventure that Othello recollected from his experiences in the battles, sieges, and encounters. Perils he had been exposed to, his hairbreadth escapes when he entered a breach, or marched up to the mouth of a cannon, and how he had been captivated by the insolent enemy and sold as a slave, how he demeaned himself in that state, and escape. Desdemona listened with rapt attention of all these accounts, added to the narration of the strange things Othello had seen in foreign countries, the vast wilderness and romantic caverns, quarries, rocks, and lofty mountains, touched the clouds, the savage nations, cannibals who are man-eaters, and a race of people in Africa, whose heads do grow beneath their shoulders. These stories enticed Desdemona so much that even if she was called for any household affairs, she would finish off the work with all haste and return to Othello, with greedy ear to devour his discourse. At the end of his stories, Desdemona would always sigh and then thank him, and wish that if he had a friend who loved her, he had only to teach him how to tell his story, and that would woo her. Upon this hint, delivered not with more frankness than modesty, and blushes, which Othello could not but understand, and he spoke more openly of his love, and thus gained the consent of the generous and gorgeous Lady Desdemona to marry. Their marriage, which though was privately solemnized, could not be kept a secret for long. When the news reached Brabantio, he appealed to the Duke of Venice, prayed for justice against Othello, accusing him of casting spell and witchcraft to seduce the gentle Desdemona, winning her heart and marrying her without taking the consent of her father. Meanwhile, the state of Venice was in urgent need of Othello. The Senate received a news that the Turks had set sail a fleet with mighty preparation for hostility. They were moving towards the island of Cyprus, with the intent to regain it from the Venetian. In this state of emergency, Othello was deemed as the most competent general to defend Cyprus against the invasion of the Turks. Hence, Othello was summoned for the Senate. He was therefore called to the Senate both as a candidate for a noble employment and esteem, as well as a culprit, charged with offenses by Senator Brabantio. The old senator was heard with utmost patience in the assembly of the senators, and the infuriated father accused Othello in outrageous manner. Hence, when Othello was called upon for his defense, he had only to narrate a simple story of his love, which he did so in such artless eloquence that even the Duke had to confess that a tale so told would have won his daughter too. The spells and conjurations which Othello had used in his courtship plainly appeared to have been no more than the honest arts of wooing, and the only witchcraft which he had used is the skill telling a soft tale to win a lady's heart. The statement of Othello was confirmed by Desdemona, who appeared in court and acknowledged that she was bound by duty to Brabantio for life education. But now she has a higher duty to perform for her lover and husband Othello, quite like her mother had done years ago in preferring Brabantio above her father. Unable to maintain his plea, Brabantio accepted the Moor as his son-in-law and told him that with all his heart he would keep her away from him. He was also glad that he had no other child. This behavior of Desdemona would have made him a tyrant and hang clogs on them for desertion. He even warned Othello about Desdemona, who had deceived her father and might also deceive him. After the trial, Othello readily went to the war in Cyprus along with Desdemona, as she refused to stay with her father any more. She boldly declared, "I loved the Moor to live with him." So the newly married couple set sail for Cyprus. But as soon they landed in Cyprus, the news arrived that a violent tempest had dispersed the Turkish fleet, and the island was thus secure. The war, which Othello was to suffer, was now beginning, and the enemies, which malice stirred up against Desdemona, proved in their nature more deadly than strangers or infidel. Among the friends of Othello, no one possessed his confidence more than Cassio. He was a young Florentine soldier, amorous, of pleasing nature which attracted the women. He was handsome and eloquent. Any married man of advanced years having a young, beautiful wife would be much alarmed of such a person, except Othello, who was free from jealousy, as he was noble and incapable of suspecting him to be infidel. He had used Cassio in his love affair with Desdemona, for Othello feared that he lacked the amorous qualities of Cassio, would please lady, so would often depute Cassio to court for such innocent simplicity being rather an honor and a blemish to the character of the valiant Moor. It was therefore no wonder if, next to Othello, gentle Desdemona loved and trusted Cassio. Hence, the marriage of this couple made little difference to their relationship. Cassio frequented their house, and his free and rattling talk was endearing to Othello, for he himself was of a serious temper. Othello had of late promoted Cassio the rank of lieutenant, place of trust and nearest to the general. Promotion gave great offense to Lago, an elder nobleman who thought he had a better claim than Cassio, would often scorn at Cassio to be a person befitting for the company of ladies, and knew little of the art of warfare. Lago hated Cassio. He also hated Othello for favoring Cassio, and also for an unjust suspicion. The Moor was too fond of Amelia, Lago's wife. From these imaginary provocations, Lago conceived a scheme of revenge that would involve Cassio, Othello, and Desdemona in one common ruin. Iago was crafty. He studied human mind deeply. He knew that of all the kinds of afflictions that torment man, pains of jealousy were the most unbearable and had the sorest sting. He thought he could succeed in making Othello envious of Cassio, and it would be an excellent plot of revenge, which might culminate in the death of Cassio or Othello or both. Cared not. The arrival of the general and his lady in Cyprus, and receiving the news of the dispersion of enemy's fleet, created a sort of holiday mood in the island. Everybody was involved in feasting and merrymaking. Cassio had the direction of the guard that night, with a charge from Othello to restrain the soldiers from drinking excessively. On that night, Lago began his deep-laid plans of mischief. Under the guise of loyalty and love to the general, he lured Cassio to have a drink, which was a great fault for an officer on guard. Although Cassio resisted initially, yet he soon fell into the guile of Lago. He swallowed wine-glass after glass and became drunk. Provoked by Lago, praised the gentle lady Desdemona. He even told Lago she is a most exquisite lady. At the end he got involved in a scuffle. Montano, a worthy officer, who interfered to pacify the dispute, was wounded in the scuffle. Taking advantage of the situation, Lago spread the alarm, causing the castle bell to be rung as if a dangerous mutiny had set in. The bell awakened Othello, who, dressed in haste, came down to the scene of action and asked Cassio, "Oz." By now, Cassio had regained some rationality, but was too ashamed to reply. Lago pretended to be reluctant to tell the truth, and, as if compelled by Othello, gave an account of the whole matter in such a manner that it seemed to make Cassio's offense less, actually made it appear greater than it was. Consequently, Othello, who was a strict observer of discipline, was forced to take away the rank of lieutenant from Cassio. Thus, Iago's first artifice succeeded. He had now undermined his hated adversary Cassio, and was successful to thrust him out of his place. Cassio, whom this misfortune had entirely sobered, now lamented to his seeming friend Lago, "Reputation, reputation, reputation. Oh, I have lost my reputation. I have lost the immortal part of myself, and what remains is bestial. My reputation, Lago, my reputation." He despised himself, thought how he could ask the general for his place again. Lago advised him to apply to the lady to mediate for him with her lord. Cassio did as Lago advised him. Desdemona promised him that she would be his solicitor with her lord. She immediately set about for this cause in so earnest and pretty a manner that Othello, who was mortally offended with Cassio, could not put her off. When he pleaded delay, because it was too soon to pardon such an offender, she insisted that it should be the next night, the next morning to that at farthest. Then she showed how penitent and humbled poor Cassio was, and that his offense did not deserve punishment of such magnitude. But Othello still hung back. So she said, "What, my lord, that I should have so much to do to plead for Cassio, Michael Cassio, that came a courting for you, and oftentimes, when I have spoken in dispraise of you, as taking your part, I count this but a little thing to ask of you. When I mean to try your love indeed, I shall ask a weighty matter." Othello could deny nothing to such a pleader. Promised to receive Michael Cassio again in his favor, but only requested Desdemona to leave the time to him. It happened that Othello and Iago had entered into the room where Desdemona was already present with Cassio, who had been imploring her intercession. He departed through the opposite door as Othello entered, and Iago, who was full of art, said in a low voice, as if to himself, "I like not that." Othello took no great notice of what he said. The interaction which immediately took place with Desdemona put it out of his head. But he recalled it later. When Desdemona departed from the scene, Iago asked Othello, as if mere satisfaction of his thought, whether Cassio knew of the general's courtship with Desdemona. The general replied in affirmative and added that he had gone between them very often during the courtship. Iago raised his brow, as if he had got fresh light on some terrible matter, remarked, "Indeed." This brought into Othello's mind the words of Iago which he said while entering the room. Thus he began to think there was some meaning in that private meeting of Desdemona with Cassio. Othello deemed Iago to be a just man, full of love and honesty. So he urged Iago to speak out of what he knew. "And what?" said Iago, "if some thoughts very vile should have intruded into my breast?" He went on to say that it would be a pity if any trouble would arise to Othello out of his imperfect observations. So it would not be wise for Othello's peace to know his thoughts. By then, Othello's curiosity was raised almost to distraction, and Iago, as if in earnest care for Othello's peace of mind, sought him to be cautious of jealousy, by the very caution he pretended to give him against suspicion. "I know," said Othello, "that my wife is fair, loves company and feasting, is free of speech, sings, plays, and dances well. But where virtue is, these qualities are virtuous. I must have proof before I think her dishonest." Then Iago, as if glad that Othello was slow to believe ill of his lady, frankly declared that he had no proof. He begged Othello to observe her behavior well, particularly when Cassio was nearby. He should not be jealous or too secure. Iago knew the dispositions of the Italian ladies better than Othello. He knew that in Venice the wives would let the world see their pranks. They dared not show their husbands. Iago craftily insinuated that Desdemona deceived her father, marrying with Othello, and carried it so closely that old Brabantio thought that witchcraft had been used. Othello was much moved by this argument. He wondered if she could deceive her father, she might deceive her husband as well. Iago begged apology for having moved him. Othello urged him to go on. Iago pretended that he was reluctant to produce anything against Cassio, whom he called his friend. However, he reminded Othello how Desdemona had rejected many suitable matches of her own clime and complexion and had married him, which showed unnatural in her, and proved her to have a strong will. So when better judgment returned, how probable it was that she would fall upon comparing Othello, the white-complexioned young Italians of her countrymen. He therefore advised Othello to put off his reconcilement with Cassio a little longer. Meanwhile, Othello should note with what earnestness Desdemona would solicit for Cassio. So mischievously the treacherous villain laid his plots to turn the gentle qualities of the innocent lady into her destruction, and make a net for her out of her own goodness to entrap her. First setting Cassio on to entreat her mediation, and then out of that very mediation contriving stratagems for her ruin. Othello's long conversation with Iago led him to restlessness. Neither poppy, nor the juice of mandragora, nor all the sleeping potions of the world once again restored to him that sweet rest which he had enjoyed only yesterday. His occupation sickened upon. He no longer took delight in arms. His heart, that used to be roused at the sight of troops, would no longer stir at the sound of drums or the neighing of war horses. He seemed to have lost all that pride and ambition which are the virtues of a soldier. Sometimes he thought his wife to be honest. Again he wondered that she was not. At times he thought Iago to be just, but at times he thought the contrary. Thus he was torn to pieces with these distracting thoughts. Once he laid hold on Iago's throat and demanded proof of Desdemona's guilt, or threatened instant death for his having belied her. Iago feigned indignation that his honesty was misinterpreted to be a vice. He pointed out if Othello had not sometimes seen a handkerchief spotted with strawberries in the hand of Desdemona, and Othello acknowledged that it was his first gift to Desdemona. That same handkerchief, said Iago, did I see Michael Cassio this day wipe his face with. Othello replied, If it be as you say, I will not rest till a wide revenge swallow them up. First, for a token of your fidelity, I expect that Cassio shall be put to death within 3 days. And for that fair devil, I will withdraw and devise some swift means of death for. Othello did not care to inquire how Cassio came by with the handkerchief of Desdemona. Passed death sentence on both of them. Desdemona had never given such a present to Cassio. Nor would this constant lady have ever wronged her husband with doing so naughty a thing as to give her lord's presents to another man. The shrewd Iago used his wife Emilia to steal the handkerchief from Desdemona under pretense of getting the work copied, but in reality to drop it in Cassio's way, where he might find it, and give a handle to Iago's suggestion that it was Desdemona's present. Soon after the meeting his wife, Othello pretended that he had a headache, and desired her to lend him her handkerchief to hold on to his temple. Desdemona did so, but Othello wanted the handkerchief which he gave her. Desdemona could not find it. That's a fault, said Othello. That handkerchief was given to my mother by an Egyptian woman. She was a charmer and could almost read the thoughts of. He told her, while she kept it, it would make her amiable and subdue my father entirely to her love. But if she lost it or made a gift of it, my father would loathe her as much as he had loved her. The lady said, Is it possible? Othello replied, It is true. It is a magical handkerchief. Desdemona was ready to die with fear, for she plainly perceived that she had lost it, and with it she feared the love of her husband. She tried to divert him from too serious thoughts. She cheerfully told him that all his talk about the handkerchief was only to put her off Cassio's suit, and went on to praise him until Othello, in perfect distraction, burst out of the room. Then Desdemona began to suspect that her lord was jealous of Cassio. When Othello and Desdemona met again, he accused her more plainly of being unfaithful, and of loving another man. Othello wept, and told her that he could have borne all sorts of evils with fortitude, poverty, disease, and disgrace, but her infidelity had broken his heart. He called her a weed that looked so fair, and smelled so sweet, his sense ached. He wished she had never been born. When Othello left her, Desdemona was so stupefied with wonder at her husband's untrue suspicion of her, that a weight-like sleep came over. She only desired that her attendant to make her bed, and to lay her wedding sheets on it. She said that when people teach their babies, they do it by gentle means and easy tasks, and Othello might have chided her so. For in good faith, she was but a child when she was children. Desdemona soon fell asleep. Othello entered the room full of dark purpose, which he had meditated of putting her lady to death. When he saw her asleep, he thought he would not shed her blood, but he was resolved that should die else she would live to betray more, as she had done him. Then he kissed her for the last time and he wept, but he said they were cruel tears. Desdemona was awakened with his kisses. She looked upon Othello, and she saw him gnaw his lips and roll his eyes. She knew he was always fatal when he looked so. He told her to prepare for death, and to say her prayers, for he would not kill her soul. Desdemona begged for mercy, and to know her fault. Then he named Cassio and the handkerchief, which he said she had given him, and as the guiltless lady was proceeding to clear herself, he suddenly would hear no more. Covering her up in the bedclothes, stifled her till she died. At the same time Cassio came in, wounded and bleeding. Iago had set one of his men to assassinate him, but the fellow was unable to kill Cassio. He was killed by Iago to prevent discovery. In his pockets were found certain letters which exposed the guilt of Iago and confirmed the innocence of Cassio, who now came to Othello to beg apology, and also to ask him the reason why Iago had been employed to murder him. The discovery was like a thunderstroke to Othello, who now felt he was no better than a murderer, and that his lady was innocent and faithful. Extreme anguish made life intolerable, and killed himself, falling upon his sword, and throwing himself upon the lifeless body of his dear wife. These rash acts raised much passion of horror and amazement among the bystanders. Othello had borne a fair reputation, and until he was wrought upon by the arts of a villain, he was indeed a loving and doting husband. He had loved Desdemona not wisely, too well. When he was dead, all his former merits and valiant acts were remembered. Iago was executed with strict tortures, and the state of Venice lamented for the demise of their renowned general Othello.
As You Like It, William Shakespeare.
Chapter 3. As You Like It. The story begins at a time when France was divided into provinces or dukedoms. In one such province, there was a usurper who had deposed and banished his elder brother, Duke. The duke, who was driven away from his kingdom by his younger brother, retired to the forest of Arden, along with his faithful followers. These people soon got accustomed to the lazy life of the forest, and they felt it to be more relaxing than the life of a court. They led the life like that of Robin Hood of England. And to this forest many noblemen came and spent their leisure time, as they did in the Golden Age. In summer they took rest under the shade of the trees, watching the playful sports of forest deer. They even felt sad that they had to kill those deer for food. In winter, when the cold wind blew, the Duke suffered from cold, said, "These chilling winds which blow upon my body are true counselors. They do not flatter, represent truly to me my condition. And though they bite sharply, their tooth is nothing like as keen as that of unkindness and ingratitude." He remarked that men might say against adversities, but there are some uses of a poisonous toad. In this way the Duke drew lessons from nature, and he found tongues in trees, books in the flowing streams, sermons in stones, and good in everything. The banished Duke had a daughter named Rosalind, and like her father, she was also thrown out of the dukedom. But she still remained in the palace, being the companion of Celia, present Duke's daughter. The discord between the Duke and his brother did not at all affect friendship between the two cousin sisters. In fact, Celia tried to comfort Rosalind whenever she became sad, thinking of her father. One day, when Celia was talking to Rosalind, in her usual kind manner, a messenger came with the news that there would be a wrestling match, and they could go and watch that, they so wanted. Celia agreed to go, thinking that it would amuse Rosalind. During those times, wrestling matches were viewed by noble ladies and princesses, being a favorite sport of princes. But here they thought that they would face a tragedy, as a practiced wrestler was to fight an inexperienced young man. When the Duke saw that both the ladies had come to watch such an uneven match between a professional wrestler and a young man, the Duke asked them to dissuade the young man from fighting. At first, Celia tried to resist the youth from taking up such an unequal challenge, and then Rosalind, by her kind words, tried to change his mind from the ensuing fight. But after hearing the entreaties of the ladies, the youth became all the more determined to prove his valor in front of the fair ladies. He refused to listen to them, but he said in such a graceful manner that both the ladies became more concerned of him. He said, "I am sorry to deny such fair and beautiful ladies anything." He also said that he would like the ladies to wish for him, and if he was defeated, he would not be ashamed. And even if he was killed, there was no one to lament for him in this world. He said that he was only a person who filled up a space in this world, and it would be better supplied if he vacated his space. The wrestling match began. Celia wished that the youth would not be hurt during the bout, but Rosalind was more concerned. She had an inclination towards him because she felt pity for his friendless condition. She could easily equate her own friendless condition with the young man. The inspiration that the youth got from the ladies worked wonders for him, and he defeated his opponent in such a way that for some time he could not even talk. The Duke Frederick was very pleased with the youth's skill and courage and wanted to know more about it. The youth introduced himself as Orlando, the youngest son of Sir Roland de Boys. Sir Roland de Boys was dead. But when he was alive, he was a friend of the banished Duke. So on hearing that Orlando was his son, the Duke was displeased and wished he had been the son of someone else. Rosalind was very happy to hear that Orlando was the son of one of her father's favorite, and confessed to Celia, "My father loved Sir Roland de Boys, and if I had known that Orlando was his son, I would have added tears to my entreaties, before he should have ventured. Ladies went to him, and seeing that he was sad due to the displeasure of the Duke, spoke to him kindly, and Rosalind even gave him her gold chain from her neck, and said that had she not been out of fortune, she would have given him a more valuable gift. When the cousin sisters were alone, they talked of the young wrestler. Celia thought that Rosalind must have fallen in love with Orlando, and she said, "Is it possible that you should fall in love so suddenly?" Rosalind replied, "The Duke, my father, loved his father dearly." Celia then remarked that though her father had displeasure for young Orlando, she herself did not feel so. Frederick was enraged at the sight of Sir Rowland de Boys' son. It reminded him of the many friends of the banished Duke. He was lately displeased with Rosalind as she was praised for her virtues, and the people pitied her father. Now, all of a sudden, Frederick became angry, and he entered the room of the ladies while they were still discussing about Orlando. So he ordered Rosalind to join her father in the forest. Celia pleaded in favor of her sister. The Duke turned a deaf ear to any such requests. He said, "She is too subtle for you. Her smoothness, very silence, and her patience speak to the people, and they pity her. You are a fool to plead for her, for you will seem more bright and virtuous when she is gone. Therefore, don't speak for her, and the decision that I have taken is irrevocable." When Celia could not change her father's mind to keep Rosalind in the palace, she decided to accompany Rosalind to the forest of Arden in search of the banished Duke. Before they set out, they decided to change their clothes, as it would be unsafe two young ladies to travel alone in rich attire. Rosalind thought that one could disguise herself as a male. Since she was taller than Celia, she decided to dress as a country lad, and Celia dress country lass, and they would introduce themselves as brother and sister. Rosalind would call herself Ganymede, and Celia would be called Aliena. In this disguise, with money and their jewels, they set out on their journey to the forest of Arden, long way from the Duke's Frederick's kingdom. The Lady Rosalind, Ganymede, in accordance to her dress, put on an attitude to her sister, left the luxury of the palace for their true love to each other. They walked along, Rosalind showing a cheerful spirit, as if he was the real Ganymede, rustic and stout-hearted brother of the gentle village maiden Aliena. When they reached the forest of Arden, they did not get the inn, food, or the good accommodation that they had got till then. Ganymede, who had hitherto cheered her sister, confessed that she could cry out of fatigue and hunger. When Aliena declared that she could walk no further, Rosalind tried to find out where they could get rest and food. But they were certain they were lost. Just then, they met a countryman and asked him where they could get some food and a place to rest in exchange of money or gold. He said that he was the servant of a shepherd who was going to sell off his house, and so they did not have much to entertain them. But if they wanted, they were welcome to their house. They followed the man and bought the house and the sheep, and also took the man to wait on them. Thus, they decided to stay till they could find the part of the forest where the banished Duke stayed with his follower. The two sisters settled in their new cottage life very comfortably, and fancied themselves to be the shepherd and shepherdess. Yet sometimes Ganymede remembered the youth Orlando, thought that he was so far away from her. But it soon came to light that he was also in the forest of Arden, following certain circumstances. Orlando was the younger son of Sir Roland de Boys, and when he died, he placed Orlando in the custody of his elder son, requesting him to bring up his brother with proper care. Oliver, the elder brother, however, did not keep the request of his father, and likewise did not educate Orlando in a school. Orlando, even without the care and help of his brother, grew up to be a fine man, and Oliver hated him more for that. He was the one who had arranged for the fight, as he wanted to get rid of his younger brother. But as fate would have it, Orlando won the wrestling match. Nevertheless, Orlando was sad at the disposition of his brother, and being friendless, he wished not to live. When Oliver heard of the victory news of his younger brother Orlando, his jealousy knew no bounds. He vowed to burn his brother alive in his chamber while he slept. This was overheard by one of the old servants of Sir Roland, and he at once set out to warn Orlando of his impending danger. He had a special affection for Orlando, as he very much resembled his father. Hence, as soon as he saw Orlando, broke into passionate exclamations. "O my gentle master, my sweet master! O you memory of old Sir Roland! Why are you virtuous? Why are you gentle, strong, and valiant? And why would you be so fond to overcome the famous wrestler? Your praises come too swiftly home before you." Orlando could not comprehend what the matter was, and the servant explained to him the reason for his concern, stating the plan of his brother to burn him in his own chamber. Adam, as the servant was named, advised Orlando to flee the place, and he, knowing very well that Orlando had no money, brought him whatever money he had saved for future use. Saying that, gave the gold amounting to 500 crowns to Orlando, and requested Orlando to allow him to be his servant, promised that though he looked old, he would take good care of Orlando and work. Orlando was pleased and grateful for the faithfulness of Adam, whom he addressed as good old man, and at once they set out with the promise that he would find some work before they had spent the savings that Adam had given him. Two, master and servant, traveled long till they reached the forest of Arden, and they were also as tired and hungry, the two sisters. They tried in vain to find a shelter and food, and at last, when Adam could go no further, Orlando carried him in his arms to the shelter of a tree, cheered him, saying, "Good old man, rest your weary limbs here a while, and do not talk of dying." Orlando then searched for food, and by chance came upon the company of the Duke and his friends. When Orlando reached there, it was dinner time. The Duke had sat down for dinner. Orlando, finding food, drew his sword to grab the food from the Duke and his men, charged them not to touch a morsel. The Duke was kind and asked him the reason for his rude behavior. He wanted to know if it was due to hunger, or did he despise the courtesy known to civil men. Orlando replied that as he was dying of hunger, he had thought that in this wild forest he had to put up such behavior in order to get food. The Duke spoke to him kindly and asked him to sit down for dinner. Orlando then spoke of Adam and declared that though he was hungry, he would not touch food unless Adam was fed. The Duke told him to bring his friend, and said that they would wait. Orlando went quickly, brought the old man, and then both of them along with the Duke had food to their satisfaction. Adam, having food, regained his lost strength. After the dinner, the Duke asked Orlando about him, and when he came to know that Orlando was his friend's son, he took Orlando and Adam under his care. After a few days while roaming in the forest, Ganymede and Aliena were surprised to see Rosalind's name carved on the bark of the trees and love sonnets, all addressed to Rosalind, attached to the. When they were wondering how it was possible in the forest to have Rosalind's name carved, they met Orlando, could easily recognize him, as he was wearing the chain, given earlier by Rosalind, round his neck. But Orlando could not recognize them because of their disguise. He discovered a likeness, but there was disposition in fair Rosalind which was missing in the youth. Rosalind, on the other hand, teased him, saying that she was in search of a certain youth who had spoiled the bark of trees by writing the name of his lady-love and attaching love poems to that effect. She even declared that if she found the lover, she would have given him some advice. Orlando told them that it was he who had done all these things, and requested Rosalind to give him some advice. Rosalind asked him to come to their cottage to play a game in which Rosalind in her male attire would feign to be his lady-love with all sorts of feminine pranks and whims, and Orlando would woo her as a genuine lover. When he would experience the whimsicality of the young lady-love, he would be ashamed of his love for her, and thus be cured of love. So, as fixed, every day Orlando came over to the cottage and wooed Ganymede as Rosalind. But it did not seem that Rosalind made any progress in curing Orlando of his love for Rosalind. Rather, she felt highly satisfied and amused to know how truly Orlando loved her. The days passed pleasantly in this manner. Aliena, seeing Ganymede happy, did not remind her that the real reason for her coming to the forest was to find her father, though, by that time, from Orlando, they had already got the location of the place where her father, banished Duke, was residing. However, one day, Ganymede met her father but did not disclose to him her true identity. When asked about it, she said that she came of a good lineage as he did. Never did the Duke suspect that she was his own daughter and had a royal lineage. One morning, when Orlando was going to visit Ganymede, he saw a man lying asleep on the ground and a snake twisted round his neck. As he approached, the snake glided away from the man. Then, as Orlando went closer, he perceived a lioness in the bush, waiting for its prey to awake, because lions don't attack the dead. When Orlando looked at the face of the man, he saw that the man was his own brother, Oliver, who had tried to get rid of him. He was about to go, but brotherly affection prevented him to leave his brother in that danger. Fought the lioness and saved the life of his brother. Thus he saved the life of his brother from the venomous snake and the dangerous lioness. But before he could save his brother, the lioness had tongue one of his arms with her sharp claws. While Orlando was engaged in the fight, his brother awoke and saw how the brother he had despised and abused so much fought with his life to save him from the lioness. He was full of remorse, and after Orlando had killed the lioness, Oliver begged his mercy. Orlando, seeing his brother repenting his deeds, readily forgave him and took him in his arms. But, as the wound made him weak, Orlando asked Oliver to give the message to Ganymede that he would not be able to visit her that day. Oliver went to their cottage and narrated to them the whole story. Moreover, he confessed his own misdeeds, and also spoke of their reconciliation. The sincere sorrow of Oliver was so overwhelming that Aliena at once fell in love with him. Oliver, on the other hand, saw how she pitied him for his distress over his misdeeds, and he also, at the same time, fell in love. In the meantime, when Oliver and Aliena were exchanging hearts, Ganymede, on hearing about Orlando's wounds, fainted. When she recovered, she tried to convince Oliver she had feigned the swoon, as Rosalind would have done. She heard about the wounds of Orlando. Oliver was not convinced, as he perceived how pale Ganymede had been, and he said, "Well, if you did counterfeit, take a good heart and counterfeit to be a man." Ganymede replied that it was exactly what she was doing, and that she should have been a woman, instead of being a man. Oliver returned after a long time and told his brother of the swooning of Ganymede, and also of his love towards the shepherdess, Aliena. He spoke in such a manner as if he had already decided upon his marriage to Aliena. He also said that he would stay there in the forest and be a shepherd. As regards his estate, he would give the same to Orlando, as well as his home. Orlando suggested that Oliver and Aliena should get married the next day. He would invite the Duke to their marriage. He also advised his brother to be quick to consult same with Aliena. When Oliver went to Aliena, Ganymede came to Orlando to inquire about his health. Orlando and Ganymede talked of how Oliver and Aliena loved each other from their first sight, and Orlando informed that his brother had gone to her, asked for her hand. They would get married the next day, if Aliena was willing. He wished he could be also married on the same day to his fair Rosalind. Ganymede liked the proposal and said that if Orlando really loved Rosalind, he should have his wishes fulfilled. She said that she would try to bring Rosalind the next day by a special magical power, which she had learnt from her uncle. When Ganymede said, "Put on your best clothes and bid the Duke and your friends to your wedding, for if you desire to be married tomorrow to Rosalind, she shall be here," the fond lover could not believe his ears. The next morning, both Oliver and Orlando came to the Duke along with Aliena. Duke, surprised to hear that it was his own daughter to be brought there, asked Orlando if really the miracle could be done. As Orlando strived to answer, Ganymede came to the Duke and asked if the Duke willed to give his daughter in the hands of Orlando. He agreed. Then she asked Orlando whether he would marry Rosalind if she be brought there. He said that he would. The two sisters went inside the cottage and put off their disguises. When all the persons were eagerly waiting for a miracle to happen, Rosalind and Celia entered in their personas. Rosalind threw herself on her knees to her father for his blessing. Rosalind then related the whole episode of her banishment from the palace and their adventure to the forest in search of her father. The Duke wept in joy to get back his own daughter and gave all of them his heartiest blessing. Two couples got married in the forest. The marriage did not have the splendor of the royals, but it was the happiest marriage that could ever be imagined. As they were having their venison, and thought that there was nothing more to be wanted at that time, a messenger arrived to inform the Duke that his dukedom has been restored to him. The usurper, enraged at the flight of Celia, and hearing that men of great worth were following the banished Duke to join him in the forest, resolved to put an end to this misery. Thus, brought a huge army to execute his design, kill his brother. As Providence would have it, he was completely changed by a hermit whom he met as he entered the forest. He, thus changed, decided to spend the rest of his days in a religious house after returning the dukedom to his brother, the real owner of the dukedom. First act of the penitence was to send the messenger to his brother to restore to him his domain, and the followers, as well as the lands and revenues. This news, as unexpected and as it was welcome, came at a time to enliven the festivity and rejoicings of the two marriages. Celia complimented her cousin on the good fortune which had happened to the Duke, and wished her joy. The Duke now had the opportunity to reward the true followers who had stayed with him in his adversity, and the worthy followers pleased to return with him to the palace of their lawful will.
The Ghost Brahman, Folktales of Bengal.
Chapter 4. Ghost Brahman. Once upon a time there lived a poor Brahman, who, not being a Kulin, found it the hardest thing in the world to get married. He went to rich people and begged of them to give him money that he might marry a wife. And a large sum of money was needed, not so much for the expenses of the wedding, as for giving to the parents of the bride. Begged from door to door, flattered many rich folk, and at last succeeded in scraping together the sum needed. The wedding took place in due time, and he brought home his wife to his mother. After a short time he said to his mother, "Mother, I have no means to support you and my wife. I must therefore go to distant countries to get money somehow or other. I may be away for years, for I won't return till I get a good sum. In the meantime, I'll give you what I have. You make the best of it and take care of my wife." Brahman, receiving his mother's blessing, set out on his travels. In the evening of that very day, a ghost assuming the exact appearance of the Brahman came into the house. The newly married woman, thinking it was her husband, said to him, "How is it that you have returned so soon? You said you might be away for years. Why have you changed your mind?" The ghost said, "Today is not a lucky day. I have therefore returned home. Besides, I have already got some money." The mother did not doubt, but that it was her son. So the ghost lived in the house as if he was its owner, and as if he was the son of the old woman and the husband of the young woman. As the ghost and the Brahman were exactly like each other in everything, like two peas, the people in the neighborhood all thought that the ghost was the real Brahman. After some years, the Brahman returned from his travels. And what was his surprise when he found another like him in the house. The ghost said to the Brahman, "Who are you? What business have you to come to my house?" "Who am I?" replied the Brahman. "Let me ask who you are. This is my house, that is my mother, and this is my wife." Ghost said, "Why, herein is a strange thing. Everyone knows that this is my house, that is my wife, and yonder is my mother, and I have lived here for years. And you pretend this is your house, and that woman is your wife. Your head must have got turned, Brahman." So saying, the ghost drove away the Brahman from his house. Brahman became mute with wonder, did not know what to do. At last he bethought himself of going to the king and of laying his case before him. The king saw the ghost Brahman as well as the Brahman, and the one was the picture of the other. So he was in a fix, did not know how to decide the quarrel. Day after day the Brahman went to the king and besought him to give him back his house, his wife, and his mother, and the king, not knowing what to say every time, put him off to the following day. Every day the king tells him to come tomorrow, and every day Brahman goes away from the palace weeping and striking his forehead with the palm of his hand and saying, "What a wicked world this is! I am driven from my own house, and another fellow has taken possession of my house and of my wife. And what a king this is! He does not do justice." Now it came to pass that, as the Brahman went away every day from the court outside the town, he passed a spot at which a great many cowboys used to play like their thorn. They let the cows graze on the meadow, while they themselves met together under a large tree to play, and they played at royalty. One cowboy was elected king, another prime minister or vizier, another kotwa or prefect of the police, and others constable. Every day for several days together they saw the Brahman passing by weeping. One day Cowboy King asked his vizier whether he knew why the Brahman wept every day. On the vizier not being able to answer the question, Cowboy King ordered one of his constables to bring the Brahman to him. One of them went and said to the Brahman, "The king requires your immediate attendance." Brahman replied, "What for? I have just come from the king, and he put me off till tomorrow. Why does he want me again?" "It is our king that wants you, our neatherd king," rejoined the constable. "Who is neatherd king?" asked the Brahman. "Come and see," was the reply. The neatherd king then asked the Brahman why he every day went away weeping. The Brahman then told him his sad story. The neatherd king, after hearing the whole, said, "I understand your case. I will give you again all your rights. Only go to the king and ask his permission for me to decide your case." The Brahman went back to the king of the country and begged his majesty to send his case to the neatherd king, who had offered to decide it. The king, whom the case had greatly puzzled, granted the permission sought. Following morning was fixed for the trial. The neatherd king, who saw through the whole, brought with him next day a file with a narrow neck. The Brahman and the ghost Brahman both appeared at the bar. After a great deal of examination of witnesses and of speech-making, the neatherd king said, "Well, I have heard enough. I'll decide the case at once. Here is this file. Whichever of you will enter into it shall be declared by the court to be the rightful owner of the house, the title of which is in dispute. Now let me see, which of you will enter?" The Brahman said, "You are a neatherd, and your intellect is that of a neatherd. What man can enter into such a small field?" "If you cannot enter," said the neatherd king, "then you are not the rightful owner. What do you say, sir, to this?" Turning to the ghost Brahman and addressing him, "If you can enter into the file, and the house and the wife and the mother become yours. course I will enter," said the ghost. And true to his word, the wonder of all, he made himself into a small creature like an insect and entered into the phial. The neat-haired king forthwith corked up the phial, and the ghost could not get out. Then, addressing the Brahman, the neat-haired king said, "Throw this phial into the bottom of the sea, and take possession of your house, wife, mother." Brahman did so, and lived happily for many years and begot sons and daughters. Here my story endeth. The Nayathorn withereth, said
The Man Who Wished to Be Perfect. Folk Tales of Bengal.
The Man Who Wished to Be Perfect. Once upon a time, a religious mendicant came to a king who had no issue, said to him, "As you are anxious to have a son, I can give to the queen a drug, by swallowing which she will give birth to twin sons. But I will give the medicine on this condition, that of those twins you will give one to me, and keep the other yourself." The king thought the condition somewhat hard, but as he was anxious to have a son to bear his name, and inherit his wealth and kingdom, he at last agreed to the terms. Accordingly, the queen swallowed the drug, and in due time gave birth to 2 sons. The twin brothers became 1 year old, 2 years old, 3 years old, 4 years old, 5 years old. Still the mendicant did not appear to claim his share. King and queen therefore thought that the mendicant, who was old, was dead, and dismissed all fears from their minds. But the mendicant was not dead, but living. He was counting the years carefully. The young princes were put under tutors and made rapid progress in learning, as well as in the arts or riding and shooting with the bow, and as they were uncommonly handsome, they were admired by all the people. When the princes were 16 years old, the mendicant made his appearance at the palace gate and demanded the fulfillment of the king's promise. The hearts of the king and of the queen were dried up within them. They had thought that the mendicant was no more in the land of the living. But what was their surprise when they saw him standing at the gate in flesh and blood, and demanding one of the young princes for himself. The king and queen were plunged into a sea of grief. There was nothing for it, however, but to part with one of the princes. For the mendicant might by his curse turn into ashes, not only both the princes, but also the king, queen, Alice, and the whole of the kingdom to boot. But which one was to be given away? One was as dear as the other. Fearful struggle arose in the hearts of the king and queen. As for the young princes, each of them said, "I'll go. I'll go." The younger one said to the elder, "You are older, only by a few minutes. You are the pride of my father. Remain at home. I'll go with the mendicant." The elder said to the younger, "You are younger than lamb. You are the joy of my mother. You remain at home. I'll go with the mendicant." After a great deal of yea and nay, after a great deal of mourning and lamentation, after the queen had wetted her clothes with her tears, the elder prince was let go with the mendicant. But before the prince left his father's roof, he planted with his own hands a tree in the courtyard of the palace, said to his parents and brother, "This tree is my life. When you see the tree green and fresh, then know that it is well with me. When you see the tree fade in some parts, then know that I am in an ill case. And when you see the whole tree fade, then know that I am dead and gone." Then kissing and embracing the king and queen and his brother, he followed the mendicant. As the mendicant and the prince were wending their way towards the forest, they saw some dogs' whelps on the roadside. One of the whelps said to its dam, "Mother, I wish to go with that handsome young man, who must be a prince." The dam said, "Go," and the prince gladly took the puppy as his companion. They had not gone far when upon a tree on the roadside they saw a hawk and its young ones. One of the young ones said to its dam, "Mother, I wish to go with that handsome young man, who must be the son of a king." The hawk said, "Go," and the prince gladly took the young hawk as his companion. So the mendicant, prince, with the puppy and the young hawk, went on their journey. At last they went into the depth of the forest, far away from the houses of men, where they stopped before a hut thatched with leaves. That was the mendicant's cell. The mendicant said to the prince, "You are to live in this hut with me. Your chief work will be to cull flowers from the forest for my devotions. You can go on every side except the north. If you go towards the north, evil will betide you. You can eat whatever fruit or root you like, and for your drink you will get it from the brook." The prince disliked neither the place nor his work. All dawn he used to cull flowers in the forest and give them to the mendicant, after which the mendicant went away somewhere the whole day and did not return till sundown. So the prince had the whole day to himself. He used to walk about in the forest with his two companions, Uppy and the young hawk. He used to shoot arrows at the deer, of which there was a great number, and thus made the best of his time. One day, as he pierced a stag with an arrow, the wounded stag ran towards the north, and the prince, not thinking of the mendicant's behest, followed the stag, which entered into a fine-looking house that stood close by. The prince entered, but instead of finding the deer, he saw a young woman of matchless beauty sitting near the door with a dice table set before her. The prince was rooted to the spot while he admired the heaven-born beauty of the lady. "Come in, stranger," said the lady. "Chance has brought you here, but don't go away without having with me a game of dice." Prince gladly agreed to the proposal. As it was a game of risk, they agreed that if the prince lost the game, he should give his young hawk to the lady, and that if the lady lost it, she should give to the prince a young hawk, just like that of the prince. The lady won the game. She therefore took the prince's young hawk and kept it in a hole covered with a plank. Prince offered to play a second time, and the lady agreeing to it, they fell to it again, on the condition that if the lady won the game, she should take the prince's puppy, and if she lost it, she should give to the prince a puppy just like that of the prince. The lady won again, and stowed away the puppy in another hole with a plank of. The prince offered to play a third time, and the wager was that if the prince lost the game, he should give himself up to the lady to be done to by her anything she pleased, and that if he won, the lady should give him a young man exactly like himself. The lady won the game a third time. She therefore caught hold of the prince and put him in a hole covered over with a plank. Now the beautiful lady was not a woman at all. She was a Rakshasi who lived upon human flesh, and her mouth watered at the sight of the tender body of the young. As she had had her food that day, she reserved the prince for the meal of the following day. Meantime, there was great weeping in the house of the prince's father. His brother used every day to look at the tree planted in the courtyard by his own hand. Hitherto he had found the leaves of a living green color. Suddenly he found some leaves fading. He gave the alarm to the king and queen and told them how the leaves were fading. They concluded that the life of the elder prince must be in great danger. The younger prince therefore resolved to go to the help of his brother, but before going, he planted a tree in the courtyard of the palace, similar to the one his brother had planted, which was to be the index of the manner of his life. He chose the swiftest steed in the king's stable and galloped towards the forest. In the way he saw a dog with a puppy, and the puppy, thinking that the rider was the same, had taken away his fellow cub. The two princes were exactly like each other, said, "As you have taken away my brother, take me also with you." The younger prince, understanding that his brother had taken away a puppy, took up that cub as a companion. Further on, a young hawk, which was perched on a tree on the roadside, said to the prince, "You have taken away my brother. Take me also, I beseech you." Which the younger prince readily took it up. With these companions he went into the heart of the forest, where he saw a hut, which he supposed to be the mendicant. But neither the mendicant nor his brother was there. Not knowing what to do or where to go, he dismounted from his horse, allowed it to graze, while he himself sat inside the house. At sunset the mendicant returned to his hut, and seeing the younger prince said, "I am glad to see you. I told your brother never to go towards the north, for evil in that case would betide him. But it seems that, disobeying my orders, he has gone to the north, and has fallen into the toils of a Rakshasi who lives there. There is no hope of rescuing him. Perhaps he has already been devoured." The younger prince forthwith went towards the north, where he saw a stag which he pierced with an arrow. The stag ran into a house which stood by, and the younger prince followed it. He was not a little astonished when, instead of seeing a stag, he saw a woman of exquisite beauty. He immediately concluded, from what he had heard from the mendicant, that the pretended woman was none other than the Rakshasi in whose power his brother was. The lady asked him to play a game of dice with her. He complied with the request, and on the same conditions on which the elder prince had played. The younger prince won, in which the lady produced the young hawk from the hole and gave it to the prince. The joy of the two hawks on meeting each other was great. The lady and the prince played a second time, and the prince won again. The lady, therefore, brought to the prince the young puppy, lying in the hole. They played a third time, and the prince won a third time. The lady demurred to producing a young man exactly like the prince, pretending that it was impossible to get one. But on the prince insisting upon the fulfillment of the condition, his brother was produced. The joy of the two brothers on meeting each other was great. The Rakshasi said to the princes, "Don't kill me, and I will tell you a secret which will save the life of the elder prince." She then told them that the mendicant was a worshipper of the goddess Kali, who had a temple not far off, that he belonged to that sect of Hindus who seek perfection from intercourse with the spirits of departed men, that he had already sacrificed at the altar of Kali 6 human victims whose skulls could be seen in niches inside her temple, that he would become perfect when the 7th victim was sacrificed, and that the elder prince was intended for the 7th victim. The Rakshasi then told the prince to go immediately to the temple to find out the truth of what she had said. To the temple they accordingly went. When the elder prince went inside the temple, skulls in the niches laughed, ghastly laugh. Horror-struck at the sight and sound, he inquired the cause of the laughter. The skulls told him that they were glad because they were about to get another added to their number. One of the skulls, the spokesman of the rest, said, "Young prince, in a few days the mendicant's devotions will be completed, and you will be brought into this temple, and your head will be cut off, and you will keep company with them. But there is one way by which you can escape that fate and do us good. Oh, do tell me what that way is, and I promise to do you all the good I can." The skull replied, "When the mendicant brings you into this temple to offer you up as a sacrifice, before cutting off your head, will tell you to prostrate yourself before Mother Kali, and while you prostrate yourself, he will cut off your head. But take our advice. When he tells you to bow down before Kali, you tell him that as a prince you never bowed down to anyone. You never knew what bowing down was, and that the mendicant should show it to you by himself doing it in your presence. And when he bows down to show you how it is done, take up your sword and separate his head from his body. And when you do that, we shall all be restored to life, as the mendicant's vows." The elder prince thanked the skulls for their advice, and went into the hut of the mendicant, along with his younger brother. In the course of a few days, the mendicant's devotions were completed. On the following day, he told the prince to go along with him to the temple of Kali, for what reason he did not mention. But the prince knew it was to offer him up as a victim to the goddess. The younger prince also went with them. He was not allowed to go inside the temple. The mendicant then stood in the presence of Kali and said to the prince, "Bow down to the goddess." The prince replied, "I have not as a prince bowed to anyone. Do not know how to perform the act of prostration. Please show me the way first, and I'll gladly do it." The mendicant then prostrated himself before the goddess, and while he was doing so, the prince at one stroke of his sword separated his head from his body. Immediately the skulls in the niches of the temple laughed aloud, and the goddess herself became propitious to the prince, and gave him that virtue of perfection which the mendicant had sought to obtain. The skulls were again united to their respective bodies, and became living men, and the 2 princes returned to their country. Here my story endeth. Nachia thorn withereth, etc.
A ghostly wife, folktales of Bengal.
Ghostly wife. Once upon a time there lived a Brahman who had married a wife and who lived in the same house with his mother. Near his house was a tank, on the embankment of which stood a tree, on the boughs of which lived a ghost of the kind called Sanchini. One night the Brahman's wife had occasion to go to the tank. As she went, she brushed by a Sanchini who stood near, on which the she-ghost got very angry with the woman, seized her by the throat, climbed into her tree, and thrust her into a hole in the trunk. There the woman lay almost dead with fear. The ghost put on the clothes of the woman and went into the house of the Brahman. Neither the Brahman nor his mother had any inkling of the change. Brahman thought his wife returned from the tank, and the mother thought that it was her daughter-in-law. Next morning, the mother-in-law discovered some change in her daughter-in-law. Her daughter-in-law, she knew, was constitutionally weak and languid, and took a long time to do the work of the house. But she had apparently become quite a different person. All of a sudden, she had become very active. She now did the work of the house in an incredibly short time. Suspecting nothing, the old woman said nothing, either to her son or to her daughter-in-law. On the contrary, she inly rejoiced that her daughter-in-law had turned over a new leaf. But her surprise became every day greater and greater. Cooking of the household was done in much less time than before. When the mother-in-law wanted the daughter-in-law to bring anything from the next room, it was brought in much less time than was required in walking from one room to the other. Ghost, instead of going inside the next room, would stretch a long arm, for ghosts can lengthen or shorten any limb of their bodies, from the door and get the. One day the old woman observed the ghost doing this. She ordered her to bring a vessel from some distance, and the ghost unconsciously stretched her hand to several yards distance and brought it in a trice. Old woman was struck with wonder at the sight. She said nothing to her, spoke to her son. Both mother and son began to watch the ghost more narrowly. One day the old woman knew that there was no fire in the house, and she knew also that her daughter-in-law had not gone out of doors to get it. And yet, strange to say, the hearth in the kitchen room was quite in a blaze. She went in, and to her infinite surprise, found that her daughter-in-law was not using any fuel for cooking, but had thrust into the oven her foot, which was blazing brightly. The old mother told her son what she had seen, and they both concluded that the young woman in the house was not his real wife, but a she-ghost. The son witnessed those very acts of the ghost which his mother had seen. An Oja was therefore sent for. The exorcist came and wanted in the first instance to ascertain whether the woman was a real woman or a ghost. For this purpose he lighted a piece of turmeric and set it below the nose of the supposed woman. Now this was an infallible test, as no ghost, whether male or female, can put up with the smell of burnt turmeric. The moment the lighted turmeric was taken near her, she screamed aloud and ran away from the room. It was now plain that she was either a ghost or a woman, possessed by a ghost. The woman was caught hold of by main force and asked who she was. First, she refused to make any disclosures, on which the Oja took up his slippers and began belaboring her with them. Then the ghost said with a strong nasal accent, for all ghosts speak through the nose, that she was a Sanchini. She lived on a tree by the side of the tank, that she had seized the young Brahmani and put her in the hollow of her tree, 'cause one night she had touched her, and that if any person went to the hole, the woman would be found. The woman was brought from the tree almost dead. The ghost was again shoe-beaten, after which process, on her declaring solemnly that she would not again do any harm to the Brahman and his family, she was released from the spell of the Ojha and sent away, and the wife of the Brahman recovered slowly. After which the Brahman and his wife lived many years happily together and begat many sons and daughters. Here my story endeth. The Nasya thorn withereth, etc.